Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event, the Mobilising of Private Sector Finance in Africa to Achieve SDG7 Outcomes. My name is Ash Sharma from the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, and I'm head of the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. It's my pleasure and honor to begin by introducing the Swedish Minister for International Development Cooperation, Per Olsson Frid. So, Per, please, your comments.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to join this panel and this discussion today on a very, very important topic of ours. Ladies and gentlemen, science is clear. We are faced with a very narrow window, less than 10 years, to drastically reduce global emissions, to stay on track, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and prevent irreversible damage to our planet, livelihoods, and ultimately our lives, not mentioning the lives of future generations. We must move now from words to action. As the Secretary General recently expressed, that we need to realize that the old carbon-burning model of development is a death sentence to our economies and for our planet. We need decarbonization now across every sector in every country. Put it more simple, the global economy needs to become a climate economy. And we must move with speed and scale to reach universal access to energy as well as all the other sustainable development goals. We need to work together and catalyze contributions from both public and private sector. There's no way we can win the fight on climate change and sustainable development without the private sector. I'm pleased to represent Sweden at this side event to share insights about how the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, as it demonstrates a successful public-private partnership and showcases that transformation is not only possible, but benefits people by creating new and green jobs and providing clean and affordable electricity to poor people living outside national electricity grids. By engaging and sharing the risk with private sector credit providers and private renewable energy service providers, Beyond the Grid is accelerating market entry in places where previously no or very few alternatives were available to vulnerable and energy-poor people. Beyond the Grid has since mid-2017 improved the lives of 1 million people in Zambia by increasing rural electrification access rates from 4% to 14%. The aim is to reach 6 million people in Africa across Beyond the Grid Foundation partner countries. Current results have been achieved with relatively modest budgets, about 100 million Swedish kroners in public financing, mobilizing more than fourfold the amount from the private sector. Because of the positive experiences and the lessons learned in Zambia, where Beyond the Grid Fund was started, Sweden has been able to expand the program to 4 more countries: Burkina Faso, Liberia, Mozambique, and Uganda, and now a second window has also been launched in Zambia. Discussions have also advanced to include the Democratic Republic of Congo into the Beyond the Grid Foundation. Sweden is currently funding Beyond the Grid with $63 million and aims to add further $20 million to support activities in the Democratic Republic of Congo once it joins Beyond the Grid. We are glad also that other donors have joined along the way. Denmark is contributing with funding to the Beyond the Grid Uganda window, and it's contributing with special emphasis on jobs and skills development. Germany, through KfW, has joined Beyond the Grid in Zambia, where one of the windows is focusing on stimulating growth of the microgrid sector. And USAID Power Africa contributing with capacity support. While not a silver bullet, but off-grid electrification is an important part of the solution. The International Energy Agency estimates that the most cost-efficient approach to realizing universal access to energy is a combination of off-grid, on-grid, and mini-grids. In this, off-grid and mini-grids represent almost 60% of the solution. Coming together under approaches like the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, I believe universal access to clean and renewable electricity for underserved people could become a reality by 2030. Sweden aims and remains committed to support our African partners for urgently needed climate action and to embark on a green transition. Climate finance is key to unlock investments into renewable energy and other green technologies. Sweden stands ready to provide both the finance and the technology and will continue to engage and support national governments in pursuing the right policy and regulatory environment that is needed to foster and flourish renewable energy off-grid sector. We welcome additional donors. We need additional donors. The private sector and national governments have to join and apply this approach in many more countries. Now, I think that we have to do this together. Partnership is leadership in this transition. And Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa is doing something new and exciting, and you can be part of it. Together we can embrace the opportunity in climate action. Thank you very much.
Millions of sub-Saharan Africans lack access to electricity and clean cooking. Expanding national grids to rural areas is expensive and not always possible. So the market for rural energy has struggled to take off, lacking investment. But the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa is changing that. The fund offers financial incentives to locally based private sector companies to reach out to rural areas and provide affordable green solutions like mini-grids and solar home systems.
We seek to de-risk commercial investments and to engage companies to offer clean energy solutions in hard-to-reach segments of the market, for places they wouldn't otherwise go. And we do this by employing results-based finance, whereby payments are made upon the verifiable delivery of connections and ongoing high-quality energy services to rural populations.
Sweden saw the potential and helped upscale the project, and it's gone from strength to strength.
Sweden and Zambia has a long tradition of cooperation in the energy sector. It was logical and natural to extend this cooperation into the off-grid sector and to engage with the private sector to speed up and mobilize more resources. That was actually the start of the Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia.
The idea behind it is to have a multi-stakeholder approach to energy development in the country. Off-grid meaning that you have to find energy solutions that do not depend on the grid. So you're looking at energy sources like solar power, biogas, and all other alternative energies that are meant especially to stimulate rural communities.
I wanted to just show you around the site and show you how the work we're doing and how our mini-grids operate, basically, in short. So looking at Ninguera itself, we have about 100 connections on the ground. We've got 100 houses that are connected to this particular grid.
Our business is a social enterprise that works to eradicate extreme poverty. We applied for Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia in order for them to support and help us expand both our reach and technical capacity that is required to fulfill our mission and be able to help us positively impact the lives in these communities that we serve.
The pilot program in Zambia has been successful, and the Bgfa program is now expanding to other African countries, Burkina Faso, Liberia, Mozambique and Uganda, with the aim to reach up to 6 million people with clean, affordable and reliable electricity by 2026.
We believe that the work of the Bgfa is more relevant than ever. My hope is that working with local and international partnerships, we can create community practice across Africa.
And thank you very much to the Minister for his words of encouragement and for the ongoing support that Sweden provides. I'd like to move directly to my colleague, Cohen Peters. Cohen Peters is the Executive Director of Goglar. Cohen, maybe you can set the scene for us in terms of a keynote presentation on the way forward, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ash, and I'm delighted to be here. And I think the topic of what I'd like to speak to is very much connected with what the Minister was talking to and what the video was about. So a really good introduction from indeed a very important topic in relation to climate change. Maybe a little bit on what it is that I represent. I'm the director of Goglar, the industry association for off-grid solar energy industries. We've got around 200 members that are selling solar lanterns, solar home systems, and the appliances that come with it, such as solar-powered televisions, fans, radios. Off-grid productive use appliances, such as solar water pumps and solar mice milling, solar refrigeration, and some community and street lighting companies. And these products are being distributed by our members on a cash sales business model, but also with a financing approach that's called pay-as-you-go, where households and businesses get these systems after a small down payment and then pay them off over a period of time. The problem that we see, of course, and the Minister alluded to that, is that there's at the moment 790 million people across the world that still do not have access to electricity and need to light their homes with candles or kerosene lanterns, need to use diesel generators if they need to have productive use powers, etc. And these are typically the most poor, the most rural, and the most climate vulnerable people in our world. The off-grid solar solutions are very well suited to help these electrify these people, households, enterprises, so that includes smallholder farmers and small businesses and public facilities, because our technologies are often plug and play and can easily be transported to reach deep into rural areas, can be rolled out fast, and then deliver from day one life-changing impact for the recipients of these systems. In terms of climate, it contributes particularly to adaptation and resilience, and adaptation in the sense that it creates jobs, enhances food and water security, and provides information access and access to digital finance. But it also creates more resilience by making sure that it strengthens incomes of households, it strengthens the access to power and information in situations of, for instance, adverse weather, and it supports communities and households with better access to health, as we've seen in the COVID crisis. There are plenty other social and economic impacts. We see that in East Africa, around a third of the users of solar home systems use them to generate more income, either by making more productive hours or by creating extra income generating options. And when they do that, they typically earn around 46 per month extra in terms of income. And we see very high satisfaction numbers from the customers around and the improved safety or recommending the products to neighbors. Altogether, some 420 million people's lives have already been impacted by a kind of off-grid solar product. So in summary, we are looking at a market of around 1 billion people, because not only are we looking at people that do not have access, but we also are looking at people that have weak grid access or want to have productive use energy. We create many and very important large impacts beyond energy. It is an industry that's has shown itself resilient and adaptive in the face of significant challenges thrown at the industry, COVID being, of course, a very big one, but we've also had locust plagues, droughts, demonetizations, currency slides, and all sorts of challenges that you encounter operating in these markets. It's the fastest and most cost-effective route towards energy access. We can't hope to achieve universal energy access in 2030 without these kind of technologies. It mobilizes private finance, it mobilizes entrepreneurial and consumer-centric innovation, and it mobilizes distribution capacities to reach those poor households in rural areas. And altogether, we think it's a critical contribution to climate justice. So, all good news? Well, unfortunately, we're not quite where we would like to be. investment in our industry has stagnated over the last 5 years. Our industry has shown resilient, has shown to deliver the impact. Our investors tell us that they are satisfied with the impacts that they receive. But our investors tend to be still impact investors and development finance institutions, and we've not been able to make the jump yet to more commercial finance. And if you look at this graph, please recognize the dark blue bars that are the elements of grant financing in there. For those that think that our industry lives off grant finance, it's actually a small percentage. But the equity and debt finance, of course, comes from concessional finance sources, such as the development finance institutions. So if we really are serious around about reaching universal energy access in 2030, the speed of growth of our industry, the speed of growth that we had before COVID, and that's actually been declined or stagnated since COVID, we need to find that growth back, and we already needed to double it, and now we need to make an extra effort. We think that an important element in there is more public funding, subsidies to leverage more private finance into the industry. As an industry, we have committed ourselves at the high-level dialogue of energy in September last year, held in New York, to deliver 1 billion, improve the lives of 1 billion people by 2030. This is a big, audacious target from where we stand today, but we think it's possible if all the players in our industry, governments, development partners, investors are all working towards the same objectives, and then we deliver these big impacts. So we very much appreciate the work of Sweden around the result-based financing scheme and the Beyond the Grid Fund. It's exactly a model that we need to do more. It's the work also together with the government of Zambia that is so critically important, and the leadership that we need from countries like Zambia to push these solutions that will help us deliver that 1 billion lives in 2030. So thank you very much, Ice.
Okay, thank you very much, Cohen, for your address. I think you've made very much a very strong business case. You've also highlighted issues related to a moral case as well, which I think is very important. Interesting also to mention the stagnation in financial flows, and I think it's very important that the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa contributes towards that mobilization and leveraging of public financing, using catalytic public financing to take forward larger amounts of private capital. So that's very, very important. So thank you so much for that. So if we move now to our next speaker, I'm very privileged that we have Katarina Amitsbøl is a member of the Danish Parliament. Maybe Katarina, you could offer some of your perspectives on the Danish participation in our program, please.
Sure. I'm very pleased to be here today because energy and access to clean energy and the UN Sustainable Development Goal 7 is very, very critical and very, very important to Denmark, and also for our development strategy that we have just finalized a new one. And why? That's because energy is, of course, critical for adapting to climate change and for general development, such as health, access to clean water, that I'll talk about also, and to education, but also, of course, for economic growth and job creation. And also that we see this even more important also because of the COVID-19 has had a major socioeconomic impact on developing countries. In the world, there's about 750 million people who don't have access to energy today, and it's actually more than half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. The numbers are staggering, and also just as the speaker before me mentioned that about 1 billion people need to get access by, you will say, by 2030. It means that by every year we need to connect about 85 million people around the world until 2030. It's an enormous task we have in front of us. So the challenge is big, but I'll talk about some of the opportunities we have. because off-grid solutions based on renewable energy has emerged now as the cheapest and fastest solution to connect communities outside the grid. New technology, cheaper prices, and new business models such as pay-as-you-go allows for efficient private delivery models. Alone prices on batteries and solar panels have dropped more than 80% in the last decade. So we're looking into access to also cheaper, much cheaper technology than we have. So it's more affordable and more reachable. But we need to, of course, to scale to achieve the SDG7. So we have the technology, we have proven business models, but we need to scale it up. And therefore, Beyond the Grid for Africa is a good example of how to scale up. And we started with this pilot project in Zambia, and now the target is to provide access to 6 million people. Financing is critical. And Africa today is only receiving 4% of global investments in energy. Denmark, we are committed to increase our development assistance to close this energy gap in Africa. We are also committed to mobilize more financing to support green and inclusive green transition in sub-Saharan Africa. Aid is, of course, not enough. And we have been working on actually transforming the narrative around aid in our developing strategy and say that aid should be looked as seed capital, risk capital to fulfill the achievement of the SDGs, where the SDG7 is really critical. We need blended financing models, and we need to rethink energy subsidies in the way that leaves no one behind. We need also to transfer knowledge and skills. We need to focus on job creation and capacity building and training in order to also create the socioeconomic impact along the value chains of energy development. One of the examples that we can look into is that at Denmark, we have set up about 360 windmill farm around Lake Turkana in Kenya, providing access to energy for about 1 million people. We should also not underestimate, but actually recognize the close linkage there is between energy and clean water. About 80% of the wastewater today is not cleaned, rinsed, although water scarcity is one of the biggest challenges. Energy and how it's cleaned is using a lot of energy, and it's CO2 heavy. We have some of the new technologies that actually we should also promote is CO2 neutral cleaning, but also using clean energy for providing access to clean water. We have a lot in front of us, but I think we are committed through the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa to also strengthen the public-private partnership. This is where I see we have a great opportunity and to really support access to green energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for your words, and we very much appreciate the Danish support for the program. Thank you for also highlighting a number of very important issues. I was very interested in your analogy of aid as risk capital, and we see that as a very key part of what we're trying to achieve. And we also appreciate, as always, the Danish can-do approach in terms of technology and technology transfer and financing. And thank you also for introducing the water nexus, and we'll come back to that later on in the panel. So if we move to our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Peter Story. Peter is at our partner, REEEP. Peter, you've been instrumental in the Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia, and you're together with our REEEP colleagues playing an important role in scaling up the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. So we'd love to hear from you some of the some reflections really on the first implementation results that we're getting, and any comments you have on the scaling of the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. So please, Peter.
Thank you, Ash. Be delighted to put a little bit more detail on the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. I think we've heard from the Minister, it's at the present time an $88 million or euro program initiated by the government of Sweden, and really to support energy access in now 5 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, based on the successful work that was done in Zambia through the Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia. And I think this is all about market creation, buying down risk, going into markets where we don't have a lot of information, creating that information and creating the stable platforms for energy service providers from the private sector, small and medium companies, to take conscious and well-informed investment decisions. So that, I think, is really what the Beyond the Grid Fund is all about. It's designed really to support and promote, incentivize the private sector, and the funding flows of the fund are directed towards the private sector, small energy service providers, international and national. And it's really what I would describe, we heard from Goglar as well, the RBF, or the results-based financing approach. It's a soft RBF in the sense that we very consciously try to provide also some upfront funding to promote the market entry and to buy down the cost of some of that and the risk of some of that market entry. At the same time, the ESPs, the companies that we're working with, are really required and incentivized to bring their own funding into this picture. So, and again, as Goglar highlighted, this is not about, it's not 100% grant-based at all by any means. The lion's share of the funding is in fact coming from equity-owned funds of the companies that we work with, and co-funding from the DFIs and the other commercial funders that are in these markets at the moment. Not enough of it, we've still got to promote more of it, certainly. And I think the fund works extremely closely with the ministries of energy, the rural electrification agencies of the countries that we're working in, and provides targeted capacity building into the companies that we're supporting to help them develop their business models and help them mature through the process of scaling and growing. This is what Zambia has achieved to date over just over 3 years of implementation now. And I'd just like to really focus here on perhaps the co-funding that has been leveraged by roughly $10 to $11 million of investment. The minister referenced it in his speech, and of course we, I think, at Beyond the Grid are extremely proud of this leverage factor of just over 4 to 1. And in doing that, the companies that we're working with, 4 companies, 3 solar home systems providers and a mini-grid company in the case of Zambia, they're just about to cross, they're just in the process of crossing the 1 million beneficiaries mark. That relates to something in the region of 200,000 connections, new connections that have been established in rural areas of Zambia, bringing light to places that were once dark, and also creating a significant number of jobs. And I think that is important. And the jobs that are referenced here are permanent jobs. Some of the other benefits that I think the fund is bringing, and we've heard about them in the other speakers' interventions, obviously education, the financial benefits of increased incomes, and the increased resilience in terms of climate, in terms of water health, and the educational benefits that that's bringing in some cases. So all round a very holistic impact that we see in the market. And just to mention that, this impact has been or is being verified independently. At COP today, we are launching the 60 decibel independent study of the Beyond the Grid Fund in Zambia, as you might be aware. And this has verified many of these impacts that we've been having in the market in terms of the quality of life impact that our customers or the customers of our service providers are benefiting from, and the improvement in their income, the improvement in their quality of life, and the satisfaction that they're getting from the service that is now being provided that they didn't have access to in the past. It's not all clear sailing. Certainly there's still more work to be done. You see that there's still 36% of customers that are experiencing challenges with their connections. And I think that is one area that we together with the service providers, with the donors, are looking to resolve as we go forward. The Bgfa program is based on 3 pillars. And these, I think, are important to understand the approach and how things work. The first pillar is an incentive pillar, a subsidy, if you like, provided to the energy service providers through a reverse auction approach based on the value for money or a weighted cost of the services that they provide and the connections that they provide to the countries that they're working with. And then 2 other components that are equally important in terms of the supporting and working to stabilize and improve the enabling environment. In Zambia, we have created the Off-Grid Energy Task Force together with the Ministry of Energy and a number of other key ministries and stakeholders within the Zambian government. And that task force meets regularly to identify challenges, regulatory challenges, fiscal and financial challenges, and then identify actors who can address those challenges. For instance, one of the challenges that was identified early on was a tax challenge. Excise was being charged ununiformly at entry for solar systems, and the task force intervened together with a number of other stakeholders to unify the codes and to ensure a uniform control at the borders of Zambia for bringing in solar equipment, thereby giving the energy service providers confidence in knowing what it would cost to bring in the solar equipment for each of their deliveries. The final pillar, very important as well, information, and I mentioned this earlier. I think in a lot of these markets, when we go into them as beyond the grid, we don't have good information as to what the market looks like. What is the ability to pay? How much disposable income do the beneficiaries, do the customers have? And what we've done is to create a software platform that plugs into the back ends of the companies that we work with. It collects real-time data, enabling us as a program to monitor in a real time the number of connections, where those connections are and how they're performing. We essentially monitor every pay-go payment in that under the contracts. And that information is providing us a complete new insight into these markets in terms of credit risk and affordability, pain points on price and the like. I think the Minister mentioned this again in his speech. This is the total funding at the moment for the Beyond the Grid before considering DRC coming from Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and the Power Africa program. And if we just jump ahead to this one for a second, you'll see that we expect that funding over the next 3 to 4 years to leverage somewhere in the region of $120 million US. And here on this slide, I've tried to identify some of the other impacts that we aim and are targeting for under the scale-up of Beyond the Grid into the new countries, Burkina Faso, Liberia, Zambia, Mozambique, and Uganda. Looking to get to somewhere in the region of targeting 1.3 million total connections and impacting 5 million or so, 6 million or so total beneficiaries. The way the funding is organized, and I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just to mention that we've organized the countries into a number of funding windows according to whether we're supporting standalone systems, solar home systems, or mini-grids, and also according to whether we're providing funding at early stage or to later stage companies. And we have two lots, a launch to scale lot, LS as we call it, and a direct to scale lot. And the launch to scale essentially provides advance payments to smaller indigenous companies, ensuring that we're not just funding international companies coming in. We're also very conscious of the Beyond the Grid Fund's role in also supporting indigenous local companies, and that's what these launch to scale lots are for, particularly in both the mini grid and also the standalone solar home systems sectors. I'll finish there. We've learnt a lot and be glad to be talking about this in the discussion round. Thank you, Ash. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and thank you very much for highlighting the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa approach. Just a couple of points I'd just pull out of that. I think we're seeing the fund is really taking things forward very rapidly. We're seeing it making a difference to 1 million Zambians. I think it's a very important number to reach, and we're moving beyond a proof of concept to real impact, and that's really what we want to try to achieve. And thank you also for highlighting the innovation in the Bgfa, because what we see now is this differentiated approach with the, as you say, launch to scale and direct to scale companies. So we're differentiating between early and late stage companies and between international and local actors, and we see that as a very important innovation going forward. So this brings me very nicely to Jonathan, just to introduce Jonathan Kampata, who is the Managing Director of the Lusaka Water and Sanitation Company, which is the largest water utility in Zambia. Maybe, Jonathan, you can reflect for us your perspectives on the program as it's been working for the last few years in Zambia, and maybe to offer some advice for us in our scale up and where we go from here. So please, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you for having me on this panel. Just to indicate, I think that from the Zambian perspective, we do have a national climate change strategy, which was launched in 2010. And basically, the objective is to ensure that we have an economy which is a climate resilient. That's a post-sustainable development through low carbon development pathways. And obviously, energy is at the core of any development. And for us, this has been integrated through the National Development Plan, all the way up to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we see that the support for improving electrification will go a long way in for us achieving sustainable development, particularly if you look at 30% of the population has access to electricity, which means that if we flip that to the other side, 70% do not have access to reliable electricity, and they use biomass. And by using biomass, it means that we are contributing to the carbon dioxide emissions. But apart from that, even just to get that biomass, it takes a lot of productive time from the communities, and most affected are the women and the children. And if we go to the rural areas, it's even worse. In the rural areas, less than 5% have access to electricity, which means a large number, up to 85%, do not actually have access to this electricity. So the off-grid systems, which has been advocated for and promoted by the Beyond the Grid Fund, we see that actually as part of the climate proofing of the livelihoods of the people in Zambia. But apart from that, if you look at the cost element, as it was indicated, this does provide a cheaper option but not only in terms of cost, but we're talking about reliability. We're also talking about sustainability. So this goes to improving the whole livelihood of the communities. Some of the benefits to be interesting to see how they can be quantified, because, like, for example, it's going to increase the education level. The children are able to read, to do their homeworks in the evening. So obviously that's got an impact. The households are able to even have appliances like TV, so they're able to follow the news. I don't know how you can quantify that benefit that going to go into improving the literacy of the population. Even just the convenience. We heard about people using candles. You have to buy a candle; it's expensive. Use of kerosene, it's also not clean. So that convenience, how do you put a monetary value to that convenience? That's going to improve the whole livelihood of the population. Specifically to climate change, we have an updated national development, national determined contribution, which was done, in fact, this year, 2021. And one of the priority areas is actually to promote renewable energy as well as energy efficiency. So this, again, falls right into our objectives as a country. But I think what we also want to see is that we want to move now beyond the basic access. I think you talked about how do we upscale. I think we need to have that incremental growth, basic access for electricity, for lighting, cooking. I think that is good, but I think that's not the end. We're looking for prosperity, so we want to see how productive use now of this electricity can be put in place. In the places like in the township, which was shown in Lusaka there, I know that some of the beneficiaries, maybe they've got a barber shop, they've got a hairdresser, so they're using that electricity for those purposes, and that's an economic activity. As a water utility company, we provide our services in the peri-urban areas as well as in the rural areas. And what we have seen that apart from the unreliability of the electricity, the people, communities we supply our water services to have got poor access to electricity. So we've got this thought that how can we also enter this renewable energy space by having a mini grid which is used to pump water, supply to the community, but also supply electricity to the surrounding communities. Apart from that, operational costs for energy will definitely come down. At the moment, as a utility, we're spending close to 40% of our income just on electricity. So we can have a double benefit, achieving SDG7, access of energy for all, as well as SDG6, access of water for all. So we see that complementary role with energy and water can play. Although at school we're told energy and water don't mix, but in this instance, energy and water have to play that complementary role to ensure that we've got this integrated development. Then finally, I think if we rely on waiting for the national grid to reach everywhere, I think that's a far ambition, because also of the cost. In Zambia, the population is quite sparsely populated, so it may not make financial and economic sense just to take a power grid to a remote area. So the mini grids, I think we see that as really the way to go. We also have a vibrant youth population, and this technology can bring on board in terms of the skills. We're talking about green jobs now. We do have a ministry that has been created by the new government, which is a ministry of green economy and environment. So with capacity building, we are sure that we are able to get jobs for the youth, to be able to work in partnership with the private sector to operate and maintain this technology. I think finally for the fund, I think just want to commend them that this is a fund which is putting up an initiative which is not an abstract. You can see that they are working from policy, legal issues to actually changing lives on the ground. You can see the tangible benefits. So I think that's a commendable job, and we just look forward to the upscaling of this initiative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you for highlighting, for really making it real, in terms of what it means in the Zambian context, the loss of opportunity if you don't have if you have a lack of energy access, but then the benefits you can see in terms of education and literacy and so forth. And I was, I like this idea you mentioned about the climate proofing of livelihoods, of making these these green jobs more sustainable going forwards. And also thank you for giving us a concrete example. I mean, you said that as a water company, by implementing mini grids, you can address a cost base of 40%. You have 40% of your costs are related to electricity. And obviously these can be significantly reduced through the use of renewable energy. So we can see some real opportunities there, and it's very encouraging that your new government has indeed established a Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, and I think that sends a very strong signal going forwards. So I guess that concludes the initial interventions. I think we've had quite a very interesting set of interventions, and we're also open, of course, to receiving comments from the audience here. But I do have some questions, and if you don't mind, the panel, I can reach out to some of you. Maybe we start with Christina. I think, as you said before, the Danish government has already set the bar high. We've heard about the Danish commitments to contribute a high proportion of international funding for climate efforts, and you've highlighted some of these issues. And we're very pleased, of course, to have the Foreign Ministry contribute to Bgfa. But what are your sort of priorities going forward for the program? And I know you mentioned this earlier on, some of the benefits that you see going forwards. How can we move forwards?
I think you put it nicely right before. Say what is our aim, and that's the climate proofing of livelihoods that you said before. I think that was I noted that down, and the green jobs, and this is all interlinked through the access to green energy. How do we move forward? I think we can be better in knowledge sharing, and sharing also the experience we have from other projects. I mentioned one before in Kenya, but there are other projects. But also I know from the private sector in Denmark is very keen to move forward and also to go into more risk-willing capital for investing in Africa, for also in the green. Then that is also, you have the green electricity, but there's a whole supply chain around that, and also some of the other sectors. I think water is very important. We also look at cooling, and cooling is extremely important for reducing food loss and waste. So this is also an area where the off-grid solutions is very important for storage of harvesting and having it into the value chain, and also for increasing export and better products. And again, that will also have the impact on green jobs. We also need to not only look at the big companies. I think it's important we also look at how can we stimulate local private sector development. I think that is really, really important. So we create also not only the electricity as an output, but also look at how we build up a national industry around that and the green jobs. And for that, we both need also more capacity building, but some of our SMBs can also, I think, maybe help in transfer knowledge and skills and be enablers for this green transition, both in terms of energy, but also in terms of a more green economy. So it's very positive to hear from Zambia. They have created a ministry on environment and green economy. I think that is very cool. I think maybe we should look into having that title transferred to Denmark. I think we are learning right here as well. So I think that exchange, that we are all part of that, we are all connected. I think we should learn from each other and from people from Zambia, and they know best what is needed in their country. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Katharina. Maybe if I move to Cohen. I think just to talk a little bit more. I think you mentioned it in your presentation, but Goglar is a global association. You have over 200 members, and I'd just like to get a view from you in terms of how does industry view the results-based financing approach that we're taking forward. We're not the first. We are looking to scale up and to take that forward. But in terms of as a means of de-risking investment for private enterprises, what's their view on that? And also in the spirit of what Katharina was saying, how can we improve? How can we make things easier for your members?
Yeah, thanks very much. Good question. As an industry that emerged from staying under the radar of governments and has only in the last few years has decided that we are not so scared about market distortion from public funding schemes, we should now start to ask for subsidy in the industry, because we feel that there's lots of people that will be left out. Affordability remains a key constraint. We are very strong supporters of RBF schemes, result-based financing schemes, as one of the ways to bring in public funding and use that to leverage more private financing in a way that are least distortive towards the market. That's not that, well, actually you want some distortion because the market wasn't performing well enough, but this is distortion in the right way and the right amount. So we're very positive about it. Also recognizing it's not a silver bullet solution. It's not the only thing that we need. What I found very interesting in the presentation from Peter is that he emphasized the role of the Beyond Grid Fund in Africa to look at smaller and indigenous companies to benefit from the result-based financing, because typically a result-based financing scheme requires quite a lot from the participating companies, and that is of course a benefit for the more established and larger companies, which tend to be more internationally owned and operated. So I'm really interested to see how that works out and whether that added emphasis is going to work in helping more local companies to really perform. On the whole, we like it very much. Alongside this, we also need other programs to work with governments in creating a positive enabling environment. Things we ask from governments are not earth-shocking on regulation. Actually, this is an industry that can do with quite light regulation, but we need some. We need some to make sure that there's no companies undercutting responsible business standards around consumer protection and quality of products. We like governments to play along by keeping products affordable by removing VAT and import duties. And we definitely, and that's perhaps even the most important, we'd like governments to really own the theme of energy access and feel responsibility for the health of the industry by including off-grid energy access and the development of the private sector around that in their electrification plans and the national plans. So that's basically where we stand, and we definitely hope that we, as Goglar, can also work more there with Sweden and Denmark. Really nice to see you investing in this fund. But on those fronts, I think we can even increase the cooperation further.
Okay, thank you. And I think one of the areas that we can collaborate on for example, it's not something that we've mentioned a lot here, but certainly when you look at the environmental impacts, the growing environmental impacts of our sector going forwards, with issues like e-waste management and so forth, and we really welcome the work that Goglar is doing in this area, which is pioneering work, and we can see real opportunities to build a community of practice. You know, we're hoping that over time we'll build up a portfolio of companies, around 30 or more companies in hopefully 6 markets, from Mozambique up to Liberia. So I think there's really an opportunity to work with industry associations also. We also are very keen to work with you on consumer protection, and we've had a chance to collaborate with your colleagues on that already in designing the program. So thank you, Cohen, for that. Maybe if I move now to Peter. Peter, you gave a very good presentation around what we're currently doing, but you've also seen in the last 20 months or so the impact of the global pandemic, and of course Africa and the off-grid sector in particular has also been hit very hard. And we've seen this with some of the companies in the Beyond the Grid Fund in Zambia. What's your feel? What's your sense of the prospects for post-COVID recovery, and what in particular? What are the immediate financing challenges that you can see currently for awardees and for future companies?
Also a good question. I don't think we have obviously we don't have the answer now or just yet. It's still going to come. I mean, the leverage figures I provided earlier, we actually calculated those, estimated them in the midst of COVID. We were doing the market study, and this was the first time that we'd done a market study actually not being able to visit the country. So we were reliant very much on networks in country to draw information, and doing as much as we could, you know, from behind our computers wherever we were based. And what we see, if you did the calculations, we've seen a reduction from Zambia to the scale up in the amount of leverage. I think we had sort of 1-to-4 leverage in Zambia. That's been achieved over the last 4 years and continues to increase a little bit, and we expect it to rise still a little bit further before the end of the program in the first program in Zambia. Whereas if you look at the scale up program now with the 88 million coming in, we've got a leverage of just over 1-to-2, and I think that has been solely, is perhaps not quite the true, but principally the result of COVID. Liquidity in the market has gone down. I think Cohen talked about the reluctance of investors coming into the market at the moment. So I think we've seen impacts. Interestingly, the operators, the energy service providers themselves, their businesses continued pretty resiliently. And I think Goglar have data that shows that through the pandemic, particularly through the first 2 waves at least, the performance for most companies in most countries, I haven't got it all in my memory now, was pretty good. And that's certainly the example or the feeling that we had in the experience that we had in Zambia, albeit that we actually provided some further support. The Swedish government stepped in with further support for our companies in Zambia to increase the duration of the program in recognition of the difficulties of rollout during a pandemic and during lockdowns and the like. So that happened, and also to put a little bit more liquidity on the table to help them through some downturn. But in fact, all of our companies in Zambia, it's too early to say in the other markets, have actually got through the pandemic pretty resiliently. And the demand for the services has somewhat perhaps not counterintuitively increased. Because people are at home, they need the electricity, they need to be able to access information, they need to be able to charge their phones, charge their computers, switch on the lights and do whatever they're doing at home rather than in their previous out and about life. So, I think we have seen impacts certainly, but probably reinforcing the requirement for beyond the grid and the PAYGO, the solar home systems providers and the mini grid providers to jump into this space.
Yeah, thank you. I think it also speaks to the resilience of the business model. You know, that these companies, this is it's a human right. You know, I mean, it's something that needs to be provided. But maybe, Cohen, I can just ask you to sort of add the views. I mean, Peter mentioned that you've been doing surveys on investment and so forth, and of course we've seen that capital has not been flowing to this market in the way that it should and what is needed. But it's also interesting to see that businesses are bearing up and proving to be resilient. What's your view on your membership?
Yeah, we've been looking at it at different angles and collecting information from different angles. And indeed, the positive word that comes out is resilient. But from there, we also are becoming a little bit more concerned than just that observation. One of the ways we've been looking at it is through consumer research. And what I found stunning is to find that quite a number of the households that have solar home systems and are paying them off on a monthly basis continue to pay them off, but yet by saving on food expenses or by borrowing from neighbors and friends. And it's that important for them to have energy access. So for us, that's a great feedback that how important energy is for these households. But it's also shocking to see that they really have to forego food expenses to keep the lights on. And I think what we see in other angles is indeed investment has stayed stable. The industries they've all lost sales in the first half of 2020, but that's bounced back in the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021. But it's also not grown beyond the level of what we had in 2019. And we were on a growth trajectory and we lost a growth trajectory. Our estimate is that around between 12 to 23 million have not been reached that we actually would have reached if COVID had not been around. And looking towards the future, is COVID over? Well, we think that the effects will last a bit longer. We think that quite a lot of the investment that we still saw happening in 2020 was actually investors backing up their own companies and not investing in new companies. They have told that they were still planning to continue investing in 2021 and further. We haven't seen that growth of industry that have received new funding, and the concentration of investment remains very, very high and very concerningly high. So for young new companies, it remains extremely difficult to access new finance. We're also concerned about what COVID has done to the wallets of households. I heard from one company last week that they think that the affordability has set back by around 4 years. So those households that have been able to make cost savings to be able to pay the lights on might not be able to continue making those cost savings. And we'll probably see that back in the data. Peter mentioned performance data. We've been collecting that also. We've been starting to collect that. I don't want to say too much about it because it's the first batch of information and the robustness of that is still not as high as we'd like to see. But it's definitely an area where we would like to work with Beyond the Grid Fund, because that's what you do in a stellar way, collecting information real time on how companies are performing and bringing that together with insights that we collect from other groups of companies will in the future definitely help us to improve insights on how companies are performing and what are key indicators of performance and what are key factors that determine their performance.
Yeah, I think the role of digitization and particularly when you look at the results-based financing regime, monitoring, reporting, verification are critical, and we need to ensure that we get that right. And of course, a lot of the work that the Bgfa is trying to do is one of the pillars that Peter mentioned is around that. Just on this point, if you don't mind, Cohen, just to ask you the next question. Really, it's fairly clear that the private sector has the ability and the willingness to do the heavy lifting in terms of the investments that are required for this sector. We've seen the numbers, and actually, when you look at the numbers compared to the scale of the challenge, I mean, it's still extremely disappointing, and we want to see more and more investment. The Bgfa is trying in its small way to try and mobilize private capital, and we mentioned that results-based financing is one way of doing that. What else can can the public sector do? What else can development partners do to draw in or to crowd in more capital into the private sector?
Yeah, thanks. A fantastic question. We think the low-hanging fruit, between quotation marks, is for governments to have VAT and import duty exemptions for off-grid solar products. Low-hanging between quotation marks because we see also in more advanced markets as a continuous discussion on whether that's justified or not. But we think that this is one of the most effective means to keep products more affordable for particularly the poor and rural consumers for which these products are so important. Other mechanisms that we can look at are guarantee mechanisms. What we would like to see in particular is local banks to invest more into this industry with local currency, because one of the risks for the industry, and the risk is always translated into a cost, is the risk of currency slides. And all these companies, they borrow in US dollars, but they get their income in local currency. And if there's what we've seen in the past, that this can slide by, say, 30% or so, and that of course means that that company loses 30% of its income that it needed to pay off its dollar loans. Having more local bank financing, and that will require those banks to be more comfortable about their financing, and guarantee schemes would be one way of doing that. Is also one way of making the market more better funded and then be able to scale better. And lastly, I would like to point out what I put on my slide with the amount of investment and the amount of grant funding in there. We don't think this industry needs to be stimulated by a high percentage of grant funding, but a percentage of grant funding to innovate more in this industry, to provide it easier, to make it easier for companies to access seed financing and to reach that proof of concept stage so that they can reach out to more equity investors. Also de-risking of equity investment with a degree of public funding. I think that's key. Debt financing is important, but it's the equity and seed financing that's always the dearest and the hardest to get.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think this is, I mean, at least we've seen that in the companies that we're working with, there is an important role to play in you can see the role of catalytic grants, which can support, particularly as you mentioned, local actors. And of course, we would like to encourage, and it's indeed one of the requirements of our program that companies come to us with commercial funding and other forms of co-financing. And to the extent that we can, we would like to offer the local financing sectors, some level of comfort that, by signing a contract with the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, here you have a viable business going forward to lend to, or better yet, to invest in. So, thank you for that. But Peter, just to continue this sort of theme, and particularly in relation to your experience with financing, what's your view on the interest of the commercial sector in some of the countries that we're working in currently? I mean, it's for many of them, it's still rather novel. The off-grid sector, they don't always understand the business models and so forth. But what's your view on that, and how do you feel that we can change that view, maybe?
Well, I think this is what the fund has perhaps been one of the most undersung outcomes of the fund. In Zambia, the reality is that 4 years ago, before the fund, there was no market in Zambia. That meant there was no commercial activity in this particular sector. So we have created, or through the market creation of the fund itself, we have created a whole new market sector in that country, obviously riding on the back of what was happening in other countries. I'm not saying that Zambia was necessarily leading the charge in that respect, but I think it's the same story in the countries that we're going into now. In Liberia, exactly the same. There is very little, no off-grid market to speak of. Burkina is just starting. Uganda is different, Mozambique a little bit different, but those two countries in West Africa, certainly, we're looking at market creation right at the grassroots, right from the beginning. And the interesting thing is that we are seeing, I think, both internationally and locally, the interest to buy into this market, to invest into it, with lots of caveats. You know, there's the caveat of in some cases, particularly in the mini-grid sector, unclear regulation. It's not such an issue for the solar home system, for the standalone market. There is certainly the issue of local currency funding. It's very rarely available in any of these markets, if at all. And if it is available, not at the cost or the price that is really convenient for or at all useful for the companies that we're working with. And then I think the other big issue, and Denmark, I think, is trying to address this, particularly in Zambia and more generally, sorry, not Zambia, in Uganda, is skills. You know, and I think this is an underappreciated problem. We have quite a lot of funding now being targeted at these markets. We have business models that are relatively proven and are evolving all the time. And we have companies, international, local, that are prepared to deploy the solutions. But those companies have trouble accessing the skills they need in the markets that they're operating in. And certainly enough of those skills. All of our companies in Zambia have faced this problem in recruiting both operational and also managerial staff. And we expect very similar challenges in Liberia, Burkina. And it's even in a relatively advanced market, if I can describe it that way, of Zambia, I think, sorry, Uganda, it's even in that market, it's a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And actually, you've brought together a number of the points I was going to summarize with. So thank you for stealing my thunder, and thank you in a good way. Yeah, I think we've had a very interesting discussion, and I thank all the panelists for your various insights. I think that we have a lot to learn, but the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa is moving apace. We are, as I say, we have around 10 funding windows open at the moment, and we hope to announce our first contracts shortly. So we are on the way forwards. We're looking at taking forward a cost-effective solution and working both with the development partners, also our host countries, and with the private sector to take forward these many opportunities going forward. And we hope that you will join us in this journey going forwards. Please do watch this space. We have a lot of information coming up on our website. We do have a report that's coming out today, and I do encourage you to take a look at that. It sets out very much the real life impacts that we're making in Zambia, and we hope to take those forward to the other countries shortly. So thank you all once again, and thank you to the audience for your participation.